I suspected my husband has been putting sleeping pills in my tea. That evening, I poured it out while he stepped away, and I pretended to fall asleep. But what I saw next left me dumbfounded. The bitterness didn't just sit on my tongue, it crawled there, thick and medicinal, while the microwave clock blinked 11:47 p.m. in our Riverside kitchen, manicured lawn suburb of Chicago, where people wave with the same hand that signs for Audis. And my husband Johnson's hands moved over my shoulders with familiar choreography but wrong music, asking, "Feeling sleepy yet, darling?" With a strange edge I'd started cataloguing 3 weeks ago, along with the other tells, the twitch in his left eye when he said, "Work late," his thumb worrying his wedding ring when he mentioned Hartwell, the way relief washed his face every morning when I reported sleeping like a rock. 20 minutes earlier, I'd tipped the whole cup of chamomile tea into the fern by the window and watched the soil drink it like it was thirsty for my doubts, and now I was climbing our stairs performing the deep dead sleep that had started a month ago, the kind where I'd wake foggy and dry-mouthed with clothes not where I left them, and memories missing like someone had edited my life with blunt scissors, while beneath the practiced stillness, my mind was a newsroom at deadline because something had shifted, and for the first time in 12 years of marriage, to a man who never forgot an anniversary and brought flowers every Friday, I was cataloguing tells that added up to something I couldn't name yet, but felt in my bones like weather approaching. My name is Wendy Lopez, Wendy Carter, before I married an architect with steel-toe boot charm and eyes that could hold a stare, and I'm 31 now, but this story starts when I was 28 and had been married exactly 13 months to a man I thought I knew. We met at Northwestern, sophomore year. He was architecture, I was journalism, and we were the kind of broke that makes coffee shop napkins into blueprint paper. "I'll design our house," he'd say, drawing lines. "You'll write stories that change the world." We married at 22 in an Evanston courthouse with cheap champagne and big promises. His career took off, senior architect by 30, partner track, while mine drifted from investigative pieces to top 5 brunch spots and how to style your mantel, the kind of work that pays bills and dulls edges. We tried for kids, tried doctors, tried pretending the ache wasn't there. Johnson handled the disappointment better, or so I told myself when he said, "We have each other, that's enough." The first crack came 3 weeks before the fern started swallowing my tea, when I woke up foggy on a Tuesday morning at 6:47 a.m. with my pajamas on backward and no memory of how they got that way. "How'd you sleep?" Johnson asked over coffee, and when I said, "Weird, actually, can't remember much after dinner," relief flashed across his face so fast I almost missed it, a tell I filed for later. That afternoon, hunting for a dry cleaning ticket in his jacket, I found a CVS receipt dated 3 days earlier. Chamomile tea, $8.99, honey, $6.47, Ambien, CR 12.5 Elandlands, 47 and Dow's 82. My stomach dropped. Johnson had never needed help sleeping. He was the kind of man who fell asleep during movies, who could nap on airplanes, who bragged about his ability to shut down anywhere, unless the pills weren't for him. The second crack came Thursday night when his phone lit up on the dresser while he was in the shower. "Scarlett," with 2 missed calls and a text I can still see like a bruise. "Can't wait to see you tonight. I'll be wearing the red dress you bought me." The shower was still running, steam blooming under the bathroom door, and I had maybe 4 minutes before he emerged wrapped in a towel asking what I wanted for dinner. I didn't take photos. My hands were shaking too badly, but I memorized the words, the heart emoji, the casual intimacy of someone who expected to be seen, to be worn for. When Johnson came out, hair damp, skin pink from heat, I was sitting on the bed scrolling through my own phone like nothing had happened, but something inside me, a piece of wiring that had been frayed for weeks, finally snapped with a quiet, surgical precision. I did what I've always done when the ground shifts. I took notes in my head, timeline, evidence, motive. Johnson started staying late about 6 weeks ago, the Hartwell project becoming a character in our marriage, demanding, temperamental, always calling at dinner. He guarded his phone, took calls outside, smiled his charming smile, and said, "Clients," in a tone that discouraged questions. I wanted to believe him, because 12 years buys a lot of benefit of the doubt, and because the alternative, that my husband was drugging me to sleep while he carried on an affair, felt too dramatic, too soap opera, too unlike the man who used to leave notes in my lunch bag that said, "You make me want to be better." But the Ambien receipt sat in my purse like a stone, and Scarlett's text sat in my mind like a wire pulled taut, and I couldn't unknow what I'd started to see. The next morning, Friday, I staged the performance, fake sips of tea, tea, a sleepy yawn, heavy steps up the stairs. In bed, I breathed like a metronome, slow, deep, the kind of breathing that signals unconsciousness, and waited. The floorboards sang their old song. The door eased open. "Wendy," Johnson whispered, testing the air. He shook my shoulder gently, waited, shook again, harder. When I didn't stir, he moved fast, dresser drawers opening, the closet rustling, the bathroom light clicking on. 5 minutes later, he walked past the bed in the anniversary shirt I'd bought him last March, all button charm for someone else, and kissed my forehead with a tenderness that made my skin crawl. "Sweet dreams, darling." The irony sat in my throat like a stone. I listened to his car back out of the driveway, his tires whisper away on our quiet Illinois street where people keep their lawns like resumes and their secrets like heirlooms. By the time his taillights would have faded at the end of our block, I was upright, hands shaking, lamp on, phone in my hand. If he thought I was drugged unconscious, he wasn't watching for me to follow. I dressed in black, jeans, hoodie, the kind of outfit that disappears in city shadows, grabbed my keys, and kept 3 blocks back as his Audi headed east into Chicago, past the lake's dark edge, into River North's glossy towers, where the valet didn't blink at his arrival, and the rent could pay our old student loans twice over. He used a key card, not a borrowed key or a hesitant knock, a key card that beeped acceptance like he lived there, like this was routine, like access had been negotiated and granted and normalized into logistics. My pulse telegraphed the implications. This wasn't a fling in hotel corners or hurried encounters in parking lots. This was something with infrastructure, with planning, with a permanence that made the Ambien receipt make a different kind of sense. I waited in my car across the street, engine off, breath fogging the windshield, cataloging details like I was filing a story. The building number, 847 North Franklin. The time he entered, 11:52 p.m. The way he moved through the lobby, like a man who'd done this 40 times before. He emerged 47 minutes later, with a woman who could only be Scarlett, 28, maybe 30, interior designer according to the Facebook profile I'd already stalked, green eyes, and the kind of smile that closes deals. They moved together like a pair that had practiced being seen without being obvious, and they drove in separate cars to a 24-hour diner on Belmont, under a humming neon sign that said Stella's in letters that had been promising comfort since 1987. I parked where condensation and distance gave me cover and watched through grease-streaked glass as they sat in a corner booth, her checking her phone, him steadying her, with words I couldn't hear but could read in the tilt of his shoulders. Reassurance, control, the body language of a man managing a nervous partner. Then he slid a manila envelope across the table. She opened it, eyes widening, lips parting on a breath I felt from across the street even though I couldn't possibly have heard it. Papers, photos. He showed her something on his phone. She leaned in, memorizing, nodding, her face cycling through expressions I recognized from my own mirror when Johnson used to explain load-bearing walls and stress points. Concentration, understanding, concern. They weren't just cheating, they were coordinating, planning, building something that required documentation and schedules, and the kind of envelope you don't hand someone in a public place unless you're confident the public isn't paying attention. I drove home on Lakeshore Drive, with the skyline in my rear view like a silent jury, my hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel, my brain assembling pieces into a picture I didn't want to see but couldn't look away from. By the time Johnson crept back into our bedroom at 2:34 a.m., I'd been watching the clock, performing sleep again, my breath measured like a metronome. I'd made 3 decisions. First, I was going to find out what was in that envelope. Second, I was going to document everything. Third, I was done pretending not to see. The next morning, Saturday, October 17th, 2020, a date I can still recite like a phone number I'll never forget. Johnson was attentive, generous, caffeinated, sliding a latte onto my nightstand like a peace offering. "You were out cold last night," he said, relief tucked neatly behind a smile. "Tea's really doing wonders." I let the lie sit between us, steaming, and said I'd slept great, like a rock, with enough sugar on the words to keep them from cutting. After he left for the Hartwell site, I called his office. "He's out with the Hartwell client today," the receptionist chirped in a voice that had perfected professional cheer. I hung up and opened my laptop. If you want to know the truth about someone in America, you start with the places that know them best: social media, pharmacies, and the digital breadcrumbs people leave when they think no one's following. Johnson's Facebook was curated, dinners, awards, photos of us that looked like we had nothing to hide. But tags don't lie as neatly as captions. 3 weeks back, a photo in Millennium Park, Johnson and Scarlett not touching, but speaking a body language that was fluent. Morton's Steakhouse, Alinea, the signature room rooftop, our landmarks, rehearsed with a new co-star. Then a photo from 2 weeks ago that made my breath catch, a delicate diamond pendant on Scarlett's neck, my 5th anniversary necklace, the one I'd assumed I'd misplaced after searching the house for 3 days, the one Johnson had said he'd keep an eye out for. He'd kept an eye out all right, he'd kept it on someone else's throat. That afternoon, while Johnson was presumably at Hartwell hell, or whatever fiction he'd constructed, I went to our home office, the room that smelled like printer ink and cedar pencils, the room he kept tidy in the way guilty men do, everything in order so nothing looks out of place. I started with the obvious, desk drawers yielding nothing but tax returns and project folders, file cabinets offering only warranty manuals for things that never break. Then the back of the bottom drawer snagged my fingernail. Not a false panel, just a catch. Most fingers don't find unless they're looking. I pushed past it and came up with a second phone, matte black, no case, a charged hum when it woke to my touch. The messages read like a project plan, not a love story. Johnson, the policy is worth $2.3 million, more than enough for both of us. Scarlett, when? Johnson, soon. Everything has to look natural. Scarlett, what about the pills? Johnson, she doesn't suspect anything. She thinks she's just sleeping well. My breath stalled, my own name reduced to a variable in his math, to a she who thinks and suspects and sleeps while plans are made around her unconscious body. I scrolled with hands that wanted to shake, but held steady because evidence requires steadiness, because journalists, even ones who've been writing fluff for years, know that shaking hands blur screenshots. I kept reading, my stomach dropping with each new revelation. Johnson, beneficiary documentation is updated. You're listed as my business partner for the new firm. Scarlett, and if anyone asks questions, Johnson, they won't. Accidental overdose. She's been having sleep problems, taking medication. These things happen. Insurance. The word slid into place with cold, clean logic. The kind you only appreciate if you've ever charted someone else's lies and found them following a blueprint. I kept scrolling until the phone gave me what no wife should ever have to read. Screenshots of my life insurance policy. $2.3 million. Johnson Lopez listed as sole beneficiary. Dated 3 years ago, when we'd refinanced the house and our financial advisor had suggested adequate coverage. The text thread was a blueprint in plain English, each message a load-bearing wall in a structure designed to collapse on top of me. Johnson, by next month we'll have everything we need. New city, new life, new business. Scarlett, I'm scared. Johnson, don't be. I've thought of everything. Next month. The phrase had the casual certainty of someone discussing vacation plans, not murder. I photographed every message, my phone's camera clicking softly in the quiet office. And then I did what 12 years of journalism had trained me to do. I created backups, 3 different email accounts, 2 hard drives, a cloud folder under a name I hadn't used since college. Then I put the phone back exactly where I'd found it, made sure the drawer caught the same way, and walked out of the office on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. I called Patricia Reeves, the lawyer who'd handled our will and house closing, all the paperwork that makes married life in America feel official. Patricia, I said, measuring each word like I was diffusing a bomb, I need to update my life insurance beneficiary. Immediately. There was a pause, the kind lawyers make when they're deciding how much to ask, and then she said, of course. Any particular reason? I kept my voice steady because panic leaks through phones like water through cracks. Just making sure my assets reflect my current wishes. Another pause. Understood. Current beneficiary is your husband. Who should it be now? My sister, Rebecca Martinez. The click of keys, a soft hum of consideration. We can process that today. It takes effect within 24 hours. One problem closed like a door. If Johnson thought this was a payout plan, he was about to learn about contingencies. Next call, Detective Ray Clark, Chicago PD. We'd worked together years ago on a feature about a burglary ring. He'd given me quotes that were both on the record and useful, and I'd given him a story that made the department look competent instead of overwhelmed. Clark, he answered, voice gravel shaped by too much coffee and too many 3 a.m. shifts. Ray, it's Wendy Lopez. I need help. I didn't soften it, didn't ease into it, didn't apologize for the weight I was about to drop on his desk. I believe my husband is planning to kill me. Silence, not disbelief, calculation. The sound of a cop's mind shifting gears from routine to code red. That's a serious statement, Wendy. What are we talking about? I laid it out like I was pitching a story to an editor who'd heard everything. The tea that started a month ago, the Ambien CR on the CVS receipt, the burner phone hidden in the office, the messages about a $2.3 million policy and making it look like an accidental overdose, the manila envelope at the diner, the timeline that kept using words like next month and phase 2, like this, was a construction project with milestones and deliverables. Do you have all of this documented? His voice had shifted into the gear cops use when they can see the shape of a case forming. Yes, audio files, screenshots, the physical device, off-site backups. Good. We can arrest him now on conspiracy and attempted murder, but his lawyer will try to argue admissibility on the recordings, question chain of custody on the phone, suggest you tampered with evidence or misunderstood context. He could make bail by dinner, and then you've got a spooked suspect, and 6 days until he decides to move up his timeline. My throat tightened, so he walks, and I have to keep pretending to sleep while he plans my murder. The stronger play, Clark said, his tone careful, the sound of a man who'd made this speech before, to other women in other kitchens with other husbands planning other murders, is to catch him in the act. We wire you. We cover your house with surveillance. The moment he administers what we believe is a lethal dose, we move. Attempted murder caught in progress is clean. Juries understand clean. They understand a needle breaking skin or about to break skin. They understand police bursting through a door to stop a murder in progress. You're asking me to be bait. My voice came out steadier than I felt, but the words landed with the weight of what he was actually proposing. Let my husband get close enough to kill me that a jury would have no doubt, but not so close that I actually died in the process. I'm asking if you're willing, Clark said. You won't be alone for a second. We control when the curtain comes down. We control every variable except his intent. And from what you've told me, his intent is already documented 6 ways from Sunday. I looked at the recorder I'd already placed in my jewelry box that morning, at the chamomile canister on the counter, at the fern by the window that had been drinking my suspicions for weeks. I thought of Scarlett's pendant, my pendant, on her neck, of the manila envelope, of Johnson's voice on that burner phone saying, she doesn't suspect anything, like I was a problem that had already been solved. I'm willing, I said, but we do this by the book. By the book, Clark agreed. Come to the station this afternoon. Bring the devices. Don't deviate from your routine. Don't tip him. We set Friday as the takedown. That gives us 4 days to build the net. That afternoon I sat in a CPD interview room that looked exactly like every interview room on TV. Off-white walls that had once been white, a table with too many coffee rings, a camera eye in the corner watching everything. An evidence tech copied my files, photographed the burner phone, logged the recorder. They fitted me for a wire, thin, warm against skin, a silent promise that I wouldn't die alone in my own bedroom. You'll feel like you're acting, Clark said, testing audio levels as I spoke. That's normal. Just narrate the ordinary when you can. Don't provoke. Let him be himself. I've been letting him be himself for 12 years, I said. I can do it for 4 more days. The days that followed had the surreal quality of a play where you know the ending but have to perform each scene anyway, hitting your marks, saying your lines, pretending the audience isn't holding its breath. Tuesday bled into Wednesday in suburban camouflage, recycling bins at the curb, a jogger with a golden retriever, Johnson leaving at 7:12 a.m. with a travel mug and a kiss pressed neatly onto my forehead like a brand. Big push on Hartwell, he'd say, thumb grazing his wedding ring. Tell noted, filed, weaponized for later. The officers Clark assigned rotated in unmarked sedans down the block, invisible unless you knew what to look for. The same Taurus twice in 3 hours, a nondescript SUV that never quite left. Inside, I narrated to the wire when it felt natural, when the silence needed breaking. Making coffee, I'd murmur, rinsing the navy mug with the gold rim that he preferred for my bedtime tea. Checking email, I'd say, opening blank documents that stared back like accusations. It wasn't for drama, it was for admissibility, for the court record that would come later, for the moment when a jury would need to understand that I'd cooperated fully, that I'd followed instructions, that I'd been a witness to my own near murder and had documented it in real time. Johnson softened at the edges as the week progressed. The tension that had pulled tight across his face for months began to relax, as if the plan itself were a sedative, as if murder were just another project approaching completion. He was attentive in curated doses, bringing home flowers on Wednesday, red roses, the kind that photograph well for grief, cooking dinner on Thursday, grilled salmon with asparagus, the kind of meal that says, devoted husband, asking how I slept with an eagerness that made my skin crawl, because I knew what he was really asking. Are the drugs working? Is the dosage right? Is my wife unconscious enough that I can proceed to the next phase? Thursday night, the tea tasted sharper. The herbal notes shifted towards something medicinal, something that made my tongue go slightly numb. I let it touch my lips and set the cup down, brow pinched like a woman trying to place a flavor she couldn't quite identify. This tastes different, I said, and the wire caught every syllable, every breath, every pause. He blinked, a flash of something pale crossing his face. Different how? Stronger, more medicinal. Store was out of your usual brand, he said too fast, voice smoothing out at the end like a hand over wrinkled fabric, like a man who'd rehearsed this answer in case I asked. I grabbed another chamomile. Different supplier, same effect. I finished the performance, took the cup upstairs, poured it down the bathroom sink while the shower ran to cover the sound, refilled it with water to keep the weight right. When Johnson came up to check on me 20 minutes later, he did the tests more aggressively than usual, shook my shoulder hard enough to hurt, lifted my arm to see if it fell like dead weight, pressed 2 fingers to my wrist like he was checking a pulse he knew how to read. Satisfied with my performance of unconsciousness, he exhaled, a long, relieved breath, and then from the doorway, with his back to me, a whisper into his phone that the recorder in my jewelry box caught clean as a bell. Tomorrow night. She's ready. The higher dose worked. We moved to phase 3. 6 days had become hours. Friday morning came with the kind of ordinary that felt like a trick. Sun on the countertops, the hum of our stainless steel fridge, Johnson sliding a latte onto my nightstand with extra care, extra sweetness, the performance of a devoted husband who had no idea his wife had spent the week wired for sound and surrounded by cops. "You slept so well," he said, relief evident in every word. "The new tea is perfect." I smiled, sipped the latte, reported that I felt great, rested, ready for the weekend, and watched his shoulders drop as if I'd just confirmed that the foundation he'd been building for a month was solid, load-bearing, ready for the final structural element. After he left for Hartwell, Clark called. "Team's in place by 9 p.m. We're monitoring all his communications. If Scarlett moves toward your house, we'll know. If he deviates from pattern, we abort and arrest immediately. Your job is to stay on script. Tea, drowsiness, bed by midnight. We'll be in position before 11 p.m. He won't see us, he won't hear us. But the second that needle breaks skin, or attempts to break skin, we move." At 11:30 p.m., the cup arrived. Fuller than usual, darker, the chamomile scent overlaid with something sharper, more chemical. "Extra strong tonight," Johnson said, as if he were talking about coffee strength and not lethal dosage. "You've seemed stressed this week. Thought you could use the extra help." The wire hummed against my skin, a quiet companion recording every word, every breath, every tell. I lifted the mug, let steam fog my lashes, took careful swallows that lowered the level without introducing much liquid to my system, and set it down with a soft sigh. "Already drowsy?" "Good," he said, watching me with eyes that catalogued my responses like data points. "Head up to bed. I'll join you after I check a few emails." I climbed the stairs with steps heavy enough to be heard but not theatrical, got into bed fully clothed beneath the covers, and lay in the dark with my eyes closed and my breath measured while every nerve in my body screamed to run, to fight, to do anything except lie still and wait for a man who'd promised to love me to instead try to kill me for $2.3 million and a fresh start with a woman who wore my necklace. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet in that Midwest way. Lawns damp from evening sprinklers, air cool enough for jacket weather, a faraway train horn reminding me that the city was always awake even when the suburbs pretended to sleep. 47 minutes later, I counted every one of them, tracking seconds like currency I might need to spend in a hurry. Footsteps on the stairs. The door eased open. "Wendy," Johnson whispered, testing my name like a question. I didn't move, didn't breathe differently, didn't give him any reason to doubt that I was exactly where he wanted me, unconscious, vulnerable, one needle away from becoming a police report and an insurance claim. He tried again, louder this time. "Wendy?" "Nothing." He crossed to the bed and did the checks with practiced efficiency. Shoulder shake hard enough to bruise, arm lifted and dropped like dead weight, fingers pressed to my wrist to confirm the pulse was slow, steady, drugged. Satisfied, he moved to the dresser. A drawer slid open with a whisper of wood on wood. The soft thud of something unwrapped, plastic, maybe cloth. When he turned back toward the bed, I slit my eyes just enough to see through the veil of my lashes, and what I saw made my heart pound so hard I was certain he could hear it, certain the wire was picking up nothing but the thunder of my pulse. A syringe, gleaming in the low light from the hallway, liquid clear as water inside, needle catching the ambient glow like a small, terrible star. He sat on the edge of the mattress, the weight of him tilting the world toward catastrophe. "I'm sorry," he whispered, and the apology was shaped like a knife, tender and lethal. "This is the only way. You'll just go to sleep. You won't feel anything. It'll be peaceful." He found the vein in my left arm with a confidence that told me how many times he'd rehearsed this in his head, how many times he'd practiced the angle and the depth and the pressure required. "Sleep well, my love," he said, and the endearment hung in the air like a noose made of silk. "Forever." The needle kissed my skin. I felt the cold point, the pressure beginning, and then the door exploded inward. "Chicago police, drop it, drop the weapon now." Detective Clark's voice, amplified by adrenaline and authority, filled the room like a physical force. Light and bodies flooded in. 3 officers, maybe 4, their movements a choreography of intervention I'd only ever seen on television. Johnson jerked backward, the syringe clattering to the hardwood floor where it rolled in a lazy arc, liquid pooling on the wood like evidence that couldn't be argued with. He looked at me then, truly looked, as I sat up and met his eyes with 12 years of marriage collapsing between us into a single moment of mutual recognition. Betrayal is a strange thing to watch grow in real time, stranger still when you're the one who planted it. "You were awake," he said, and the words were pulled from him like a confession he hadn't meant to make. "For weeks," I said, my voice steady because the wire demanded it, and because I needed to hear myself own it, needed to make it real, not just in my head, but in the air between us. "I know about Scarlett, I know about the policy, I know about the phases and the plan, and the manila envelope at Stella's diner. I know all of it." His face cycled through shock and confusion and calculation, before landing on rage, pure, incandescent fury at being outmaneuvered, at discovering that the woman he'd spent a month drugging into unconsciousness had been conscious enough to build a case against him. He lunged, instinct overriding strategy, but the officers were already on him. Hands to wrists, metal to bone. The litany everyone in America can recite from television. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Clark lifted the syringe with gloved hands, his face professionally neutral, but his eyes carrying something harder. "U-500 concentrated insulin," he said, more to the room than to me, establishing the record. "Enough to crash a non-diabetic into hypoglycemic shock, coma, death, fast. Looks like a medical emergency if no one's looking too closely, which he was counting on." He turned to me, still sitting up in bed, my left arm marked with the tiny bead of blood where the needle had barely broken skin. "You're okay. He didn't inject. We got here in time." Paramedics materialized like an answer to a question I hadn't asked out loud, checking my arm, my pupils, my pulse. "No injection," one confirmed, voice calm and clinical. "Just surface puncture. You're clear." Clear. The word settled on my tongue like communion, metallic and electric and somehow holy. They led Johnson out in handcuffs, his face a mask I couldn't pass anymore, rage and shame and something that might have been grief if I'd been willing to grant him the emotion. At the bedroom doorway, he twisted back to look at me one last time, mouth opening as if he had something to say, some final argument or apology or accusation. But whatever words he'd been rehearsing died in his throat, and the officers guided him forward into the hallway, down the stairs, out the front door where the neighborhood was waking to red and blue lights, painting our perfect suburban street in colors that meant someone's ordinary life had just ended. The house exhaled. Evidence techs moved through in quiet choreography, photographing the syringe, the navy mug, the chamomile canister, bagging the burner phone, documenting the scene with the thoroughness of people who know this will end up in court, that every photograph and measurement and note will be scrutinized by lawyers looking for cracks in the narrative. I sat on the edge of the bed and watched them work, my hands beginning to shake now that the adrenaline was draining, now that the performance was over, and I could afford to feel the terror I'd been holding at bay for 4 days. Clark sat down beside me, close enough to be grounding, but not so close as to crowd. "You did everything right," he said quietly. "The wire was perfect. Your narration was clear. We've got him on attempted murder, conspiracy, probably a dozen other charges the DA will pile on. He's not walking away from this." I nodded because words felt too big for my mouth, too complicated for the moment. "What happens now?" I managed. "Now," he said. "Now you breathe. Now you sleep, actual sleep, not performance. Now you let us do our job, which is building the case that keeps him locked up for the rest of his natural life. Your job is done." But it wasn't done. Not really. The case would take months, arraignment and bail hearings and motions and discovery, and eventually a trial, where I'd have to sit in a courtroom and describe the taste of drugged tea and the sound of my husband whispering, "This is the only way," while holding a syringe of insulin meant to stop my heart. There would be Scarlett's testimony and financial records, and the manila envelope's contents, and the text messages that read like a business plan for murder. There would be neighbors who'd wave at me with different eyes, friends who'd stopped calling, a divorce filing and property division, and the slow, grinding machinery of justice that doesn't care how tired you are or how much you just want it to be over. But for now, in the immediate aftermath, with evidence techs bagging my life and paramedics checking my vitals and the wire still warm against my skin, I allowed myself one small, private victory. I had trusted my instincts. I had investigated instead of ignoring. I had built a case instead of becoming a casualty. And when the moment came, when the needle kissed my skin, and my husband whispered his final endearment, I had been ready. The fern by the window, still drunk on weeks of drugged tea, would eventually die despite my best efforts to save it. But I wouldn't, and in the small hours of that Friday night turning into Saturday morning, with my house full of police, and my marriage officially dead, and my future uncertain but undeniably alive, that felt like enough. If you've read this far, if you've ever suspected something was wrong but didn't know how to prove it, if you've ever had to choose between trusting your gut and trusting someone you love, I see you. Document everything. Trust your instincts, and remember that the person who says you're being paranoid might just be the person who needs you not to look too closely.